Hello, children. My name's Santa Claus. Ho, ho, ho. Or am I? Ha ha! I fooled you, didn't I? The question is, how do you know if the Santa you see at the mall or in this video is in fact the real Santa Claus? Well, you'd ask the right questions, right? You'd ask, what's your name? And you'd hope that he would answer what? St. Nicholas, right? That's technically his real name. You'd ask him maybe what year he was born, because we know Santa Claus is older. So if this guy or girl says, for instance, they were born in 1983, 1984, 1985, you'd be like, I don't know if I trust you on that. But then finally, you'd also check to make sure they actually look the part. Well, here's the problem. When you're looking for sources for your speeches, which you're going to have to do for 3 out of your 4 speeches, you're going to be fooled. Just like I fooled you in the beginning of the video, didn't I? I look like an impressive Santa. Okay, maybe I don't. Maybe you knew it was me. It doesn't matter. But the point is, when you're looking at sources, how do you know if they're the real deal or if they're in fact not credible? Well, that's what we're here to find out today, and that's why I'm dressed up as Santa Claus. Also, it plays into the whole ICE thing as well. Now, ICE stands for 3 very important things, as you can see. But before we get started, turn your course back to page 28. Let's look at the first example in speech 1, okay? All right, so essentially, after you have completely iced out a source, which is what this prep is all about, and again, we're talking about the sources for your speech, it's going to look exactly like those 4 sources that you see on page 28. So let's look at this one. According to an NBC article in 2013, in 1963, monk Thich Quang Duc lit himself on fire to protest the Vietnam War. It is regarded as the most symbolic and quietest protest in history. How do we know that this source is credible? Okay, and ice out correctly. 1, we have NBC. So we know, guess what? NBC is a credible source. We can trust them. It's okay. 2013, that's when the article was born. So that's a good sign, right? It's pretty close to 2015, so we can assume that it's pretty recent. Although this is kind of a timeless example, so that doesn't matter as much. And last but not least, we have the main idea, okay? And if you remember from Prep 3, what type of source is this? Hopefully you chose example. Why? Well, because it's a real-life demonstration that supports the main point, which is all about actions speaking much louder than words when you're protesting. Okay, so you see these 4 sources on page 28. Those are 4 properly iced out sources. Spoiler alert, you're going to have to do that for each source in 3 out of your 4 speeches. I know right now you're thinking, oh my God, that's crazy. But don't worry, I'm going to teach you how to do this. Now, this is going to seem really complex, but once you get the hang of it, it's going to be just like opening gifts on Christmas. You're probably not laughing. All right, so the first thing to do is identify the main point, okay? Now, don't confuse this with the main point of your speech. So instead, cross out point and write idea. Identify the main idea. I realized that when I was working on this video, that could be confusing. Okay, so what does it mean to identify the main idea? Well, you're basically trying to figure out what the source is saying and how it will support your main point. Remember, the main point in this speech is the specific area in life that it is true in. In your informative speech, it's going to be a little bit different. But again, your sources have to support your main point, and your main point has to be a complete statement. Okay, so once again, just in case I confused you. Okay, so to identify the main idea, you want to figure out what the source is saying and how it will support your main point. Okay? So here's some tips on how to do this. Bullet point number 1, check to see, is this a stat, a testimony, or an example? Right away, you're going to know, yeah, this kind of, I can tell there's a statistic here. Okay, I can see that this is, someone's professional opinion, or you can say, oh, this is talking about a real life demonstration. Okay, good. So check that off, because remember, you don't want to have too many stats, too many testimonies, or too many examples. You want to try to round it out, just like my belly. You like that one? That's improv, folks. All right, bullet point number 2, check whether or not this actually is going to support your main point. Remember, your source has to support or defend your specific main point. So if you're saying that your proverb or quote is false in, let's say, sports, then make sure your source supports that, okay? Bullet point number 3, please make sure to put the source in your own words unless, and put unless in caps, it is someone else's testimony, okay? Why am I asking you to put this in your own words? Well, I want you to learn how to take people's sources, or how to take information and how to put your own spin on it so you can explain it in a simple way that your audience can understand, okay? It's too easy to just copy and paste. Nope, I want you to put it in your own words. Remember, if it's a statistic, You got to go back to Prep 2. You got to humanize it. You got to summarize it. What does it mean? Okay? If it's a testimony, that's okay because it's someone's professional opinion. And so you can use their own language. But if it's an example, remember, you want to put that in your own language. So unless it's a testimony, you got to put it in your own language, okay? So that's step number 1, identify the main point. If you're confused at all, please rewind and we'll move forward. Oh, also, please don't fast forward through this video. This is really important stuff. You got to listen really closely. You might want to watch this video twice because if you don't get this right for each source, you're going to lose mega points, okay? And I know whether you've been naughty or nice when it comes to sources, and you don't want a lump of coal on your first speech. Too much, too abstract. What I'm trying to say is, if you don't get this right, it's going to kill you. And I don't want you to lose points on this because students struggle with this. That's why this is like the 4th time I've taped this because I haven't been able to really explain this in the way students understand. All right, we're at 1B, check for credibility. This is so important, okay? So what's the definition here? Well, at the most basic level, you're checking to see whether or not the source in question is in fact credible. Let's talk trustworthiness. Remember, I can look like Santa Claus, but am I really Santa Claus? Well, that's for you to find out. And here's the key. You don't take it for face value. Because remember, websites are great at making themselves look very credible. But the reality is, how do you know whether or not the source actually is something that you can trust? Well, here's 3 tips on how to do it. First, the easiest way is to check, is this from a highly regarded news source, okay? This can include major news stations like Fox, CBS, ABC, NBC. Or the New York Times, the USA Today, ESPN, and as much as I hate to admit it, even Bleacher Report has gotten a lot of credibility if you're doing sports. Okay, so write this down. This is so important. If it's from one of nationally recognized sources, then you know it's credible. Okay, so you're good. You are good. You can simply say, just like the example I said from the protester from page 28, this is in fact credible. However, if it's not, then we got to go to bullet point number 2. You have to check and see if the author himself or herself has some kind of credibility statement. Do they have a master's degree in this area? Do they have a bachelor's degree in this area? Have they been a journalist for a long time? What makes the author credible? How do you check? Well, a lot of times you can go to an about button. Sometimes, like if you're looking at someone's personal blog, for instance, they'll tell you about what they've done. So maybe they're an author of a world-renowned book, or maybe they're a professor at a university. Either way, you want to check and see if that author has some credibility statement you can put in there. So that is so important. If you have no credibility statement, guess what? How do I trust that the source is credible? Finally, this is the last part. Is it a recent year? Okay, check the year it was published. Now, this is important because if it's a statistic and it's from 1983 and you're talking about cell phone usage, there is going to be a huge gap, right? So you want to make sure that the year is a relevant year or a recent year, okay? Now, here's the kicker. You should write this down too. If it's from a website and it's a really good source and you know it's credible because it's from a recognized author, or even better yet, it's from a recognized news source, then you can just tell me what year it was or what year you accessed the website, okay? Write that down. If you can't find a year, you can tell me the year you accessed the website. So you can say, yada, 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 from this website. It's credible because it's obviously USA Today, let's say, accessed in 2015, okay? You're going to have questions about that, and that's okay. But please make sure you take your time and write this down. And like I said, if you have to go back, because this is really important. It's okay. All right. Next, 1C, explain the credibility in the main point. This is where you take 1A and 1B and you put it all together into a nice, beautiful sandwich, okay? All right, so this is really kind of the meat that's in between the bread, right? We got the 2 parts. Now we got to do what's in between, okay? We know what kind of source it is. We know it's credible. Now we got to put it all together in a beautiful marriage. All right, so explain the credibility and main point. This is only 1 to 2 sentences tops. Think about this like a summary. And it's only for your outline purposes. You do not, I repeat, you do not read this in your speech. This is simply for me to tell right away whether or not your outline is organized. I can look at these sources, get the main idea. I can find out whether they're credible. I can look at your main point. I'm actually thinking I'm looking at your outline right now. I can look at your main point and say, okay, yep, each source does support that main point, okay? So remember when I gave you that example of the upside down triangle? It's exactly like this. At the very top, you got your takeaway. At the most basic level, what's my proverb or quote saying? Then you got your main point under that. That's a specific area of life. And then everything under that should support that main point, okay? So, How do you explain the credibility and main point? Well, tip number one, make sure you have the author's name if it's available, along with a credibility statement of some kind, whether it's why the author is credible or the nationally recognized publication like New York Times. And finally, the year. Okay, that's the first part. If you're missing any of these things, it makes us question the credibility of the source. So you need all of those in this 1 to 2 sentence summary. Number two, or step number two, or bullet point number two, you have to include the summary of the major ideas in your own words unless what? Yes, unless it's a testimony. Hopefully you said that out loud. Your roommates are probably looking at you like you're crazy. But then again, so am I. I'm dressed up as Santa. All right, third bullet point. Make sure the sentence or two has a good flow. For example, you could say simply according to or in a study in 2013. Yes, I know this feels like a lot right now, and you do have to do it for every source. So the better you get at this, the quicker it's going to be for you. All right, so let's go back to page 28. Let's take a look at these sources, okay? So let's go down to Ranker, a website collecting data from surveys and polls in 2014 found that 70% of those surveyed said Jesus is one of the most memorable people of all time, followed by Muhammad with 65%, proving that the most memorable people are the ones who follow through with their beliefs through actions, not just talking about them. Okay, so we've got the statistic. That's good. We know it's a statistic. We've got the year. It's 2014. That's really good. It's really recent, and we have a credibility statement for Ranker. Okay, so that kind of makes sense. We kind of got that main idea. Now, obviously, in your speech, if you're using the statistic, what would you need to do? Right, you would need to humanize it or summarize it. You'd have to do one of those two things. Look at that. I'm getting a phone call. That's what happens when you leave your phone with you. In fact, now I'm wondering if you can even hear the vibrating. All right, so before you end and go do your thing, remember the next step is to find a source. So go back to Prep 3, look at the tips I gave you for finding a source, and I want you to ice out exactly how you see it on page 28 or 29, or you won't get credit. Folks, I'm not going to lie to you. Other than the fact that I'm hot, I'm here to tell you something very important. Feels good to take that off. I want you to do well in this class, but more importantly, I want you to be credible. If your audience has any reason not to believe you, they're going to shut down and they're going to stop listening to you. So even though this feels like a ton right now and you're like, gosh, Adam, you're so anal. What are you thinking? I'm thinking if you do this for every source you cite, oh my gosh, people are going to be like, wow, this person did the research. I can trust them. I can believe them. Now remember, this is much different than how you're used to citing things in English class. And the reason why is because I'm trying to teach you how to write conversationally so that when you're in your speech, you don't forget all this important information. What's that? I hear a question from you. You said, wait, all this has to be in our speech? Yes, exactly. It's in your outline, so I know it will be in your speech as well. But guess what? The next prep is going to talk about pricing, which is how you present your ICE source. So keep that in mind. Again, I know it feels like a lot, but this is for your own good. All right, folks, I'm going to leave you with a warm greeting. Ho, ho, ho. Merry Com 357. See you soon.